introducing Ilvy today, who will be talking to you about her work. She'll talk for around 45 minutes, and then we'll have a chance for some questions from you. We've disabled the chat and the audio, however, today, just to keep things nice and clean. But you do have the opportunity to submit questions through the Q&A button, which should be in the middle of your screen. And when Ilvy's done her presentation, I'll be fielding those and passing the questions on to Ilvy. So feel free to add questions as we're talking, as we're going through the session. And we'll look forward to rejoining you all in about 40 minutes' time. So Ilvy, over to you. We're really looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I'm very happy to see it's a full house. I'm in the Netherlands, so it's 4 o'clock here now, and I know some of you are now in the morning or the evening, so I hope you're all settled in, and yeah, I'm really happy that you're all here to listen to my presentation about my long-term project, Born Free. So to start off, I think it would be best to explain that, well, I'm a documentary photojournalist, so a documentary photographer. I've been working for the past 13 years, and my long-term project on South African youth started 12 years ago. So it basically started right after I started photography, and it was kind of by accident that I ended up in South Africa. I was there on an internship in 2007, and so this was 1 year after I finished studying photojournalism and journalism in the Netherlands. And I went there for an internship, and what really struck me in South Africa, I mean the country in general, but what really struck me was the youth of the country, because they were very, I guess compared to what I'm used to in the Netherlands, I think South African youth were very much involved in demonstrations, in I don't know, it seemed like every news job I had to photograph, because I was doing the internship at a local newspaper in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and I think every assignment I got had young people involved as well. For instance, this demonstration, I remember half of the people there were probably under 25, between like 20 and 25. So I realized, okay, these young people of South Africa really have a voice. They're very vocal. And that's when I realized I wanted to focus on them. So during my internship at this newspaper, every assignment I went on, I made sure to include young people. And in the beginning, I don't know, I mean, I think there are different ways to start a long-term project, but the way I did it in the first years was by just slowly involving young people of South Africa within my photography. And then after a couple of years, I realized, oh wait, these young people in South Africa apparently are so interesting to me. I'm going to focus on them solely. Like when being in South Africa, it's going to be my main approach. So the story I decided to focus on was the after Apartheid generation. So apartheid in South Africa lasted for, I think, 48 years, if I'm not mistaken. And it was the segregation system where, the black and the white people were segregated. You had white beaches, black beaches, white bars, black bars. And I mean, it's quite a complicated society. And in 1994, Nelson Mandela became the first black president of the country. I think many of you know, but just for this, maybe some of you don't know, just a bit of the background. And what I realized is that the young people who were born around 1994, around the time of the start of the democracy, are actually the generation that were born into freedom. So that's also why they're called the Born Free generation. And when I, during my internship, started focusing on these young people, I realized they are born in freedom, but how free are they really? Are they really that free? I could still see that many of the South African black and colored communities were living in poverty. There was still such an inequality that I thought I needed to, or I felt like I wanted to focus on them. So in my trips, in South Africa, because after I finished my internship in 2007, I went back almost every year up to last year, 2019. I went back almost every year. Any excuse was good enough. For instance, this picture you see here was taken during the World Cup. I was sent there for the Dutch press agency, and I was taking pictures of, the Dutch team, of the soccer team. And but in the meantime, while I was photographing these soccer games, I made sure I would go and drive around and go to the townships and go to the different areas to photograph the young people who were experiencing this World Cup. So I'm gonna make a little jump. This is right before the World Cup preparations started. So I was in South Africa photographing the hotel or the hotels in which the Dutch national team would be sleeping. It was quite a boring assignment, but I was already super happy and lucky to be in South Africa, flying in from the Netherlands to photograph these hotels. And while being there, photographing the hotels in which the soccer players would be sleeping, I got a phone call that Eugene Terreblanche passed away. This is Eugene Terreblanche. Some of you might know him. He was the leader of the Afrikaner, what's the English translation? Afrikaner Weerstandbeweging. So it's like it was a right-wing organization that during apartheid wanted their own country with only white people. I'm not sure of the English translation now, but he was the leader of this organization, and he got killed by two of his workers, and it was by accident while I was in South Africa. So I decided to leave the hotel photography and fly to Johannesburg to go to his funeral. And while at his funeral, I saw all these white extremist people that were still kind of believing that the apartheid system was the way to go, and they were all very much against the new South Africa, Nelson Mandela. They truly believed that a white state would be the way forward for the country. This is on the left side, you see the South African police force, and on the right side, you see some of the farmers that were attending the funeral of Eugene Terreblanche. And while being there and taking these pictures, and this was kind of for my own, I wasn't publishing them at the time. I just went there because I thought the fact that he died and that he got killed, it was such a significant moment as well. I just felt I wanted to be there. And during that funeral, there was a moment where the coffin was being brought towards the church, and you actually can't very well, but under the elbow of the two guys on the left, you see the coffin. And as you can see, I wasn't really in the best spot to take a picture. There were many colleagues, there were hundreds of photographers at this funeral, and I was being pushed towards the side where I actually couldn't take the best picture because I was standing right in the entrance of the church. So the sad and crazy part was that I really couldn't move from left to right. I was kind of stuck, and the coffin had to move through, and it almost couldn't because I was there. And when you see the guy with the green beret on the right side, the one with his hand like this, he got really, really angry at me. He was screaming, and he told me to go out of the way and to make way for the coffin. And while he was screaming at me, I realized, or I kind of wondered, like, who is this guy and why are you wearing a brown uniform? Because I know that the South African Defense Force is wearing blue, and I know that the police is also wearing blue. You could see that on the other image that I just showed. And this guy was wearing brown. So after I made my way out of the entrance of the church, I kind of went to that man and walked up to him and asked him who he was and why he was wearing this uniform. And he told me that he was part of the Commando Corps, which is like a commando organization, a right-wing organization. And he told me he was organizing camps for young white South Africans to learn more about their Afrikaner white heritage. And he really believed that these young white people should be proud of their Afrikaner heritage, and that's why he organizes camps. And when he said that, I asked him, how old are these kids? And they were between 13 and 25, which was really the age range of my Born Free project. So I asked him if I could join the camp. And at first he said no, and he said no many more times because I had to fly back to the Netherlands. After, I think, spending 3 weeks in South Africa, I flew back and I called him almost every week. And I asked him, please, can I come to this camp? Can I please come to the camp? And he kept saying no. And then I think after 8 or 9 calls, he said, okay, I'm gonna let you in. So this is the first picture I took at the camp. And there was one problem, or I'd say a problem with this picture. It could have been taken anywhere. It could have been a Boy Scouts camp. You can't really tell this is a right-wing extremist camp. And I was a bit afraid that even though I would be able to take pictures of the students coming to the camp, I thought, well, maybe it's not really going to show how racist it is. Because right at that first moment when he was sitting here on the couch, he said this, all blacks are barbarians. And when he said that, I realized, okay, we need to record audio. I was there together with my colleague Alice van Gelder, who was at the time only writing. And right there, we started recording audio, recording video, because we realized we need to record the things he is saying. Because if we don't record this, people are not going to believe it. But we didn't know how to make a video and how to record video. We never used, back then it was the Canon Mark II, I think, was the first camera I had that could actually video or that could film. And I remember standing there at the camp, figuring out on Google how to make a proper video, which settings to use, which angles would be good, and so on. And then we filmed the whole camp. And I'm going to show you a 5-minute multimedia piece that we made about this camp, which was our first video experience ever, our first multimedia ever. And also, it won a first prize at POYI and at the World Press right in that year. So it was a crazy, it was quite crazy for us if you realize that we really didn't know what we were doing. So I'm going to show you, it's about 5 minutes.
Ek hou van Suid-Afrika, ek hou van ons ruimtes. As 'n mens hier buite gaan staan, dan kan jy tot op die horison omtrent kyk. En jy sien net vlaktes en dit is mooi. En jy kry seker nie in die wêreld soveel verskillende natuurskone soos wat jy in Suid-Afrika kry.
Beweeg, kom, vat die tasse aan. Net Untitled Chapter daar op jou trap. Kom, kry lewe. Beweeg, ons nie al aansyd nie. Ek is moeg, ons gaan slaap, né? Kom. Kyk nou, net maar as môre hier. Slaap ek, né? Hè? Ek sê hulle moet kyk nou. Beweeg, beweeg. Bring. Jy begin. Kry my kind. Beweeg.
Ek het net deelgeneem om my familie te probeer beskerm en te leer waaroor gaan dit om so 'n tipe persoon te wees, om 'n regte man te word, nie meer die sissie nie.
Ons dra die uniform van die ou Suid-Afrikaanse weermag, wat die breinklere was. Ons het ook een van die uniforms gekry waar daar 'n gat deur die uniform geskiet was en waar daar bloedvlekke op die uniform was. Laat daar geen twyfel wees nie. Behalwe vir die Aborigines in Australië, is die swartes van Afrika die mees onderontwikkelde barbaarse spesies van die menslike ras op hierdie aarde.
Alpha!
I don't like the racism because people tend to get angry at one another and they maybe eat one another.
Ek glo Suid-Afrika is die reënboognasie, ja, want as dit beteken dat daar is verskillende groepe, mense of volke, etniese groepe in een land. Kyk, ons het basies Khoisas, Zulus, Wendas, dan het ons Indiërs.
Nee, ek hou maar eerder vas. Nee, moet breek nie.
Dit vat 'n les van 'n uur en ek draai sy kop en ek swaai hom. Dan weet hy is nie meer deel van die reënboognasie nie. Hy is deel van 'n nasie, 'n ander nasie, wat 'n baie trotse geskiedenis het.
Hy het genoeg voorsiening gemaak sodat
Ons is Afrikaners. Ons is 'n volk in eie reg. Soveel disrespek het ons vir hierdie ding.
Wel en al Jooste het 'n baie sweet spot ergens in sy hart waar hy omgee vir sy troepe.
Nou weet jy hoe lekker trappe my.
Ek voel dat ek die oupa figuur is, of die vader figuur is ten opsigte van hierdie seuns. Nee, hy sê dit. Ek wil by Jan klim die berg om die boere te vererf. Dis 'n manier om 'n mens te terg. Wat is die grootste verskil tussen jou en 'n swart man? Die cortex. Onthou die woord, die cortex. Hy kan nie daai beplanning doen nie. Nie omdat hy swart vel het nie omdat hy 'n plat neus het nie omdat hy dik lippe het nie, omdat sy cortex 120 gram ligter weeg as jou cortex.
Ek skree bravo op, okay?
Ja, ons lei hulle speel op. Maar terselfdertyd terwyl hulle speel is ons besig om hulle op te lei vir 'n oorlogssituasie. 3-4 Wie is my vyand in Suid-Afrika? Dat ek tot so 'n mate my huis en soos 'n fort moet beveilig? Wie bedreig my tot so 'n mate dat ek heeltyd moet uitkyk vir hijacking? Wie moor, roof en verkrag? Wie is hierdie wesens? Wie dink julle is dit? Dis swart mense.
Toe ek op die grond was, dit het hard gevoel, dis sleg, jy wil nie dit doen nie, dis moeilik, dis fisies seer kry en dis, kyk hoe lyk my hande, ek meen, dis geestelik seer kry, dis, jy wil net jouself bewys en vir hulle sê, ja, maar ek kan, en ek gaan, want ek wil.
Hou daai arm styf. Daar's hy, dit lyk beter.
Arms, ja, ek kan nie meer doen wat ek nou doen nie. Ek kan nie, ek weet ek gaan maar teleurstel, maar ek kan nie.
Ja, hierdie kamp bevorder rasisme, maar nie slegte rasisme nie.
I thought of a rainbow nation, but there is nothing like that in South Africa.
Ja, ek voel nou definitief meer soos 'n Afrikaner. Ek voel daar vloei Afrikaner bloed in my. Ek wil nie Suid-Afrikaans wees nie. Ek wil nie met hierdie reënboognasie geassosieer word nie, want dit is nie hoe dit moet wees nie en dis nie hoe dit gaan wees nie.
Van ons land Suid-Afrika, ons land.
As ek lief is vir my eie volk, as ek lief is vir my eie taal, as ek lief is vir my eie kultuur, as ek lief is vir my eie ras, en jy sê vir my dan is ek 'n rasis, ja, dan is ek 'n rasis. En ek is nie skaam om te sê ek is 'n rasis nie, want as in hierdie land in Suid-Afrika is daar een van twee dinge moet jy moet wees, of jy's blind of jy's 'n rasis.
Sal lewe, ons sal sterwe, ons vir jou Suid-Afrika.
So, yeah, this project became such a big part of the Born Free story in general. It was really, it became such a big part of it. Let me see if I can, there we go. And there were, in this one presentation or in this one video, there were 63 images, which for a photographer, of course, is not very normal. Because usually when I publish a story, maybe there's 12 images, or in a newspaper, maybe 5. But this now had 63. Another thing that happened, I'm just going to flick through these. You've seen most of them now already. But another thing that happened, and that's why it kind of, this one part of the Born Free project kickstarted the rest of the Born Free project, because of the World Press and because of POII, there were so many international publications interested in this particular story. And I'm going to show you some of the publications. And what happened, it was published all over the world. So in a way, it kind of kickstarted my career, which was great, but it also gave a lot of attention to a group that is actually a minority in South Africa. It's a fringe organization. And of course, it's mentioned in the reportage text. It is also mentioned in the multimedia that you just saw, that it's a fringe group. But because it got so much attention all around the world, I really, and also the journalist that I was working with Alice, we both felt the fact that it had so much attention to this particular story. After this, we really felt we had to concentrate on telling more and more and more Born Free stories to make a very complete picture. Oh, this, by the way, was a very important publication. This was in South Africa. It changed a lot. They researched the camps. They tried to close them down. But in the end, the government didn't manage to close them down because it's freedom of speech. But for us, the international publications gave us a lot of reactions from around the world, and everyone was very interested in the project. But at the same time, there was also people within South Africa, especially white South Africans that are not extreme right, just normal white South Africans. They kind of felt like, why is there now so much attention on this particular group? And of course, I agree with that, and I really had to make sure that in the bigger Born Free publications that this would become a small part and the other stories would become bigger. So I continued because this camp was photographed in 2011, and I continued every year with documenting new groups. And I'm going to show you how I structured this, and I'm going to kind of explain how I did this long-term project and how I would suggest just a few advice and pointers on how to work on long-term projects. So I think it all starts with a good idea, and I know many of you have great ideas, and I'm sure many of you already started working on some of these ideas. But I think a first thing, looking back at the Born Free project, what I would do is definitely, and I didn't do this, but I'm definitely going to do it with any other project I work on, write a mission statement. throughout the years, I changed the course of the Born Free idea a couple of times, and it would have helped me so much if I would have a really structured start. But I think for me, the structured start kind of started in 2014, and that's when I wrote down, okay, what is this project? Why do I want to tell it? Because there has to be a very specific why. Why do you want to tell this story? In the beginning, I couldn't think of anything else besides saying, I'm interested in young South Africans born into a free democracy. But you have to be more specific. You have to have good reasons why you're working on a project, and at the same time, write it down. Also, I mean, in the end, that also makes it easier to pitch the project to editors. And do research. You can't do enough research. Read books, listen to local radio shows, buy the local newspapers, speak to people constantly, ask them questions. What is your society like? What is life like? In my case, what is life like in South Africa? What do you guys do? Who would you photograph if you were me? Who would you ask to be part of this project? Planning. I mean, I have made so many Excel sheets with names and people, who to meet where. It was a bit of a hassle for me because I'm not the best planner. If I would have had more money, I would have hired a producer, but I didn't, so I produced it almost entirely myself. Then we come to the money part. I could speak for another hour, I think, about funding, but I'm not going to. The way I funded this project, and I don't think this is the way to go, what I did is I took assignments and I did assignments, which is very lucky that I was able to get assignments, mostly in the beginning in the Netherlands, but later on also in other countries. And by taking these assignments, I was saving up money to then spend in my personal project. I can tell you that's maybe not the best way to do it. A best way would be to ask for funds and grants. I did a little bit of that throughout the years. I got some support from the Canon Female Photographer Grant, but I think that was about it for grants. So on my next big project, I'm going to do a lot more grant writing. Persistence, determination, that's definitely something you need in a long-term project. I've had countless times where I thought, I'm gonna just quit. I'm just gonna quit. It's not a story. People are not interested. I had a lot of editors throughout the years saying, oh yeah, interesting story, but not for us. And I just kept thinking, but this is a story. But what I didn't realize is that the story, I mean, now 2019 was 25 years after apartheid's ending, and that's the moment when everyone was interested in the story. But I already started pitching it in 2016 and 15, and people were like, oh, 2019 is so far away. No one was interested, so far ahead of things. Collaborate, definitely. I collaborated on this project, for the most part of it, with a journalist who later on, after Afrikaner Blood, also started doing video. Constantly tell people about what you're doing. That's what I did. Online, I mean, the online presence of Born Free has been quite big because I kept pushing, telling people, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. It's good to keep people kind of in the loop of what you're doing. It's good for editors to see what you're working on. When you start pitching, after you've started shooting, make sure, or not even if you only start pitching, but also before you start shooting, make sure there is an angle that's somehow interesting enough to publish it. This could be anything. It doesn't have to necessarily be news, but it would be great if it's something new. So when you call an editor, or if you want to make a book, or whatever you want to make your long-term project on, be sure that it's relevant. And before you start shooting, you have to really have this relevant peg kind of in your mind, because that's how you keep going in the end. That's how you continue your project. You keep thinking back about, okay, this is why I started this is what I want to tell, and you kind of have something to hold on to. Use different ways of telling the story. I'm going to show you a little bit about that in the upcoming minutes that we have, in the upcoming half an hour, I hope. And then for everyone who's not shooting yet, but who is interested in starting to shoot a project, just start. I mean, really, that's the thing. Just start, because there are always reasons not to start. There's always reasons why you wouldn't start working on your project. But the moment is, I mean, just do it, because there's no better time to just start shooting now. Because I think even if it's a personal project and you're now locked in your home, just start on something. I think even now this time is a good time to start, because I don't know, with long-term projects, you can always change the direction, but if you don't start, there's no direction to change. So that would be my one advice. Just whatever you want to do, try to start writing things down, start shooting, whatever you can do now. I know you're all probably kind of stuck at home, but start with something. Start with the mission statement. So after Afrikaner Blood, I really didn't know how to kind of make a selection of which young South Africans to follow. I wanted to include everybody, and I didn't know how, because you can't really include everybody, but you have to, because you want to tell a diverse story. So I luckily found the National Youth Policy. That's the thing you see now. You can't really read it, but what it is it's a policy that was written by a government group that, together with Nelson Mandela actually, and they wrote this policy to better the lives of certain youth groups. And not only to better the lives, but also to make clear which kind of youth groups there were. So they had this written down in this thick policy that I read a couple of times, and I made selections of these groups, and I started reaching out to people. And all these young people that were mentioned in this policy were also kind of in subcategories, the key strategy areas. So as you can see here, education, training, health, economic participation, these were all the subcategories that they were kind of placed in. And I decided to go and take pictures of people in different groups from different backgrounds, rich, poor, white, black, people with an Indian background, colored people, rural areas, cities, everything. And that's basically what I worked on. I organized it in Excel sheets with names, countless names of lists of names of people. The green ones were the ones that said, yes, we want to be part of this. The red ones didn't want to be part of it. Orange, I've never heard back from them. So it was quite a lot of organizing. And as I said, if you do have the funds, you might want to find a producer. So I think the one thing that all the young people said, there was one thing in common throughout all the young people I followed, is that when I asked them, can I follow your life? Can I photograph your daily life? The thing they said was, you can, but our lives are very boring. We just sit inside, we watch television, we go to school. And I told all of them, no, that's fine. I'm just going to go to school with you. I'm going to sit next to you when you're watching television. And I did that. And while doing that, I felt so bored at times. Not only bored, but I just got frustrated because I felt I wasn't getting the right pictures because they might be too boring. For instance, these two guys on the couch. But then if you collect all these daily life images, and I've literally spent, I kind of redid my whole high school in South Africa again, just by going to schools with these young people. But by doing that, I think now that I collected everything and I made the book and I made the exhibition, after 12 years of daily life images and sometimes feeling that it wasn't enough, or that it wasn't exciting enough, let's put it that way, I realized that I now captured part of the daily life of young people that all together show the life in South Africa currently for young people. I'm just flicking through these images, but you get an idea. This was Nelson Mandela's funeral. And again, this was also in the days ahead of his funeral. And I focused on the young people. Of course, I also took all the pictures for the Newswire that I was working for at the time, but I always made sure to focus on the young people as well. I've been to several graduation parties. I've sat through countless boring school days. I went to clubs and to bars. And I went to the Gay Pride. That was actually one of the specific groups that were mentioned in the youth policy, was the LGBTQ community. And I really wanted to include them as well, because in 1994, besides the country becoming a democratic country with the first black president, it was also, South Africa was the first country to allow gay marriage. So I thought that would be great to include in the project as well. And up to today, South Africa is still the only country in which gay people can get married. It's the only African country. I included the Indian population, which is a whole separate group. Actually, during apartheid, they were a separate group as well. I think in a long-term project about people, the big trap is to forget to take shots like this as well. I really had to tell myself, okay, not only focus on people, not only focus on people, you want to see where they live, you want to see details. So in the past 2 years, I've been shooting a lot of more still life, I guess. Throughout the stories, I made sure to always ask the young people that I was following, in this case William, who's a homeless guy in Durban and a really good surfer. I'll go back one picture. It's really a weird story, or an amazing story in a way. He's homeless, he's involved in quite a lot of crime as well, basically to get food and to survive. But at the same time, he's a really good surfer. Because he works, or this organization that works with homeless street children in Durban, they teach the street children how to surf. So he's a very competitive surfer, and this is the place where he lives. I'm not going to talk about every individual image, but what I wanted to say is that I asked all the young people that I followed through the different layers of society. I always ask them, who do you think I should follow next? Do you have an interesting cousin or maybe a neighbor? And they would usually point me towards new people to follow. So the way the selection of the Born Frees came about was actually in a collaboration with the Born Frees themselves. And while doing so, I also made sure to look at the policy and to keep track, to kind of stay on track. So the youth policy had, I think, about 25 different youth groups mentioned. So it would be, for instance, one of the groups was young people living with HIV/AIDS. And I made sure that I would reach out to organizations and ask them, okay, would you have an interesting young girl or a young guy that would like to be part of the Born Free project? This is a picture I took in the home of one of the Born Frees that attended the youth camp, the video that you guys just saw. And I spent 2 weeks with 5 of the guys of the camp. So the 5 guys that were the ones that were mostly speaking or being interviewed in the video, we went back to their houses, or I went back to their homes and stayed with their family for about 2 weeks each. And in the beginning it was boring, but it also gave me a chance to really see how the camp changed them, what kind of family background they came from. And I made sure also to return to them after 6 months and again after a year to see how the camp changed them. And I think this was a shot that I took. This family was watching a lot of television, and this was a shot that I took after, I think, staying there for a week and a half, thinking I'm not going to get any shots. And then I got this moment where the girl is lifting her feet and not even looking at the woman who's cleaning underneath her feet. And yeah, I thought it's something that I've kind of seen happening, but I thought it made an interesting shot, especially because this family was quite racist. I mean, that's why they sent their boy to go to the camp. and again, more general shots also of what South Africa kind of looks like. That was something I was really missing in the last parts. When I kind of checked all my images after working on it for 10 years, I missed some landscapes, and that's what I shot in the last 2 years a lot as well. This is Manenberg, an area in Cape Town, and it was a very specific story that luckily we got to sell this story. It was about a high school prom in a very dangerous area, and that's how we try to keep on funding the Born Free project, by selling off separate pieces. So what we did, this separate story, we sold it to several international media, just as a story on its own, but in the end it also became part of the bigger Born Free project. At times it was difficult to reach the outer edges. For instance, this super rich guy, it was quite difficult to find a really rich South African, not because they're not there. There's many wealthy South Africans and also many wealthy young South Africans, but they don't necessarily want to show it in the media. They didn't really see, or they didn't really think it would be interesting to be part of a story. So I really had to contact him at least 10 times and be like, oh, do you want to be part of this? And in the end, he agreed. And I spent some time with this guy, Jason, who's a millionaire and who makes his money through Forex trading. And this is his 21st birthday. This is Elihle. She's a HIV/AIDS. She has HIV and she goes to schools and talks about what it is like to live with HIV/AIDS. Jim. I'm going to show you a very short video. It's only 1 minute. It's of this boy and this girl. And they are an amazing couple that I met by accident. And I had been looking for a mixed couple for a long time and I couldn't find one. And then I just kind of bumped into them. I'm going to show you a very short video.
We met on Tinder.
Tinder success story,
Yeah.
they say. Yeah, I don't think either of us actually were intending to get into something.
You know, sometimes.
Love is love.
Oh, that's deep.
Some people started treating me differently once they knew I had a white girlfriend. Like, how did you get a white girl? Like, it seems so fascinating to some people, and it's just like...
We don't look at each other and be like, oh, you're like different than I am, and like that makes us interesting, or like, ooh, I'm trying something different. You know, like,
Yeah.
I always get pizza, but like maybe tonight I'll try sushi. Like, it's not like that. It's just like we have like a great connection. We really like love each other, and we have like a lot in common.
It's almost unheard of. Of like a Zulu and Afrikaner coming together, loving each other so much, and like, I don't know, I'm getting all mushy.
I see South Africa in 25 years from now as being much better than it is today.
I'm hoping to see a more democratic country with more opportunities, less homophobia, and less racism. So basically just one happy, colorful, democratic country.
This was actually not a separate video on its own. It was the end of my short doc that I made. It's a 13-minute short doc. I will ask Seven if they can share the link somewhere so you guys can watch the full thing if you'd like. I think I went a bit too slow, so I'm going to speed it up a bit. As said in my little list of things that I would do if I would be making another long-term project, I said I would definitely diversify the outcomes. So in the beginning I thought, oh, I only want to have publications. And then I realized, oh, maybe I should also make an interactive website. And well, it kind of went on from there, and then an exhibition, and it started growing. And I think you have to find ways that match your story best. I was really, really lucky that now, well, last year, 25 years after apartheid's ending, there was media from all around the world that wanted to publish the story. This definitely was the most amazing publication I ever had. It's like, I don't remember the amount of, like 29 pages in Politiken in Denmark. It was amazing, and what amazed me most is that the Born Frees throughout it all, even now, we're still in contact. South Africa is on lockdown now. I've been in contact with most of the Born Frees that I worked with throughout the years, which is about 25 people. And they were so proud to be published around the world. I guess the one that shows best is this guy who has a little shop, a little stall with clothing on a street corner in Pretoria, South Africa. And his name is Innocent, and he ended up on the front page of a major South African publication. And that day, well, I'll show you. It's better to show you. Wait, this is him with the book that I made. And this is his shop. This is all the newspapers he could buy and find that morning. He bought them all, and he started selling them at his clothing store. Well, he was very proud. And that makes me proud again as well. I think for me the most important publication that I made besides the exhibition and the book is the online long read. I'm gonna really flick through it quickly, but please check it out if you like. It's bornfreegeneration.com. You do need quite strong internet to watch it, but yeah, if you do, check it out. It has all the stories and the different images and videos from the 12 years. I'll go through it very quickly, because I don't want to run out of time too much. And then I made a book, and a weird story, I didn't want to make a book. I felt like I only wanted to make an exhibition and an interactive long read, mainly because I felt that the Born Frees themselves and people in South Africa should be able to see the project. That's why I really wanted to have an interactive long read. But then at the last moment, I realized, okay, I also would really like to make a book. And I actually asked Wilmarie, the girl that you see on the cover, kissing her boyfriend, Sakiti. She said, no, you need to make a book. Let's do a book. And she's a designer. So one of the Born Frees actually designed the book and put herself on one of the 4 covers. And the book is a bit different than a normal book. And I saw this design from a designer in Warsaw, in Poland, and I loved the way she thought of kind of an unfolding book, and I felt this matched way better, or matched the Born Free story with all these young people a lot better than a normal book. So that's why Wilmarie and I decided to make the book this way. And it has 35 images of the past 12 years. And I think what I learned from doing this long-term project, I am not necessarily the kind of person that stays focused very long. Like, I do a lot of different assignments, and that's what I like to do. Long-term projects always scared me a little bit. But now that I've put my focus into these young people, what I realized is that when you just start shooting, you can do this. Anyone could, as long as you take it step by step, just start small and continue. And I think when you continue with a long-term project, and when you look back after a year or 2 years or 5 years, or in my case, 12 years, you've really made something that hopefully lasts. That's what I hope. I think this is all I could tell you, and I think we also kind of ran out of time, so I was wondering if there are any questions. And thank you
Fantastic,
so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Huge round of applause. That was brilliant. Really rich. And I really appreciate the way you talked about a lot beyond the pictures, the way you were talking about the research and the planning and grant writing. And we actually do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and group them together. We had quite a lot of people asking similar questions to each other. So one question a lot of people were asking about was your editing process. So how you're obviously shooting a lot of pictures, but how did you work? And obviously also you're editing this for multiple different outlets. And as you're going along? And then how do you kind of manage the workflow, as it were, of editing a project like this as you're going along?
Yeah, well, I guess throughout the years, what I did, because I was trying to make a living of the separate stories, the separate Born Free stories that I was making. So I was making edits. Let's say I would be in South Africa for a month or a month and a half. I would go home, make an edit, and then try to sell it to different media outlets. So that was quite standard, I'd say. But then the big edit, the kind of the hell on earth edit, of course, arrived in 2019 when I was making the exhibition and the book and the online long read. And I actually asked editors to help me. I was lucky to be able to ask some colleagues at Seven to help me. But I think the biggest help came from two friends, Evelien and Renate, who sat with me. They're both in the photo world, so they also knew what I wanted to achieve. Because I think when you're editing something like this, you have to make sure that the book has a different edit than the website, because people want to see different things. And an editor of National Geographic wants to see something else than an editor of Marie Claire magazine. So what I try to do is always ask advice when you're editing, because it's so difficult to edit. Well, I find it so difficult to edit my own work, because some of these pictures, a lot of time went into it, a lot of love went into it. Some of these pictures you had to stand in the rain for 5 hours, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good picture. But because you put so much time in it, you think it is a good picture, but it might be a horrible picture. So I think my best advice would be, while you're shooting a long-term project, make edits and stay organized as well. Make folders. Make sure you will still know after a year or after 5 years what all these pictures are about. So also make captions. And then when you're doing your final edit, ask several people. Don't ask too many, but let's say you ask about 5 different people what their opinions are on the pictures.
Great, thank you. That was great. So we had a question from Andrew, which was about the work he did with the right-wing, militia camp, and he was asking really about, how do you work with a group like that? He was asking about, did they know about how you felt about racism, and how do you navigate, working with a group of people who you perhaps don't agree with in terms of the politics of what they're putting forward in your own politics? How did you navigate that ethical dimension of it?
Yeah, really good question. I'm not sure if I have a short answer to this, but I'll try. What happened is that, of course, Alice and I were very much against everything this camp leader was saying. And at the same time, we were also feeling so bad for these young people. They were being brainwashed, and at times we almost had the feeling we had to save them, kind of. But of course we didn't, because we were there to shoot this, and we wanted to record all the things he was saying. And what the Colonel Jooste would constantly do, he would ask us, what do you think about this? Don't you agree that black people are so-and-so? And they have smaller brains, and you know it. And we didn't know, at first we felt like going against it. So that was the first try. And then he just said, well, you're just stupid. One day you will find out. All these people will one day find out how stupid black people are, blah, blah, blah. So then we realized it's not going to help us if we keep going against him. Luckily, he didn't get angry and didn't push us out of the camp, because that was our first worry. So from then onwards, we kind of just stayed. And I'm still in contact with him. I just kind of stay, I don't know how to call it, like a flatliner. When he asks me my opinion, I usually hover around the answer. He doesn't even notice it. I hope he's not watching, but I kind of hover around his answers. I'm not really saying anything. I just kind of make him believe I'm answering his questions, but I'm not really. So I think that would be my advice when you're working with a difficult group like this. Well, I wouldn't get involved into trying to change their minds, because we learned very quickly, no, that didn't work. But we also felt that we couldn't stay silent. Sometimes when he was literally asking our opinion, that was the main problem. He kept asking us, do you have a black friend? Have you ever seen any black people that you trust? Things like that. And we had to answer, but he was totally ignoring our answers. So then we realized, yeah, we're just gonna not really answer. and make him talk, basically. I hope that answers the question.
That's great. Yeah. So I've got a few. I'm combining several questions in together here. So apologies if I'm not giving people's names, but there's quite a lot of people asking about the connection between, how do you actually work with people so they don't feel self-conscious and they seem to allow themselves to open up to you. And then linked to that is, how do you then manage the permissions and privacy? Do you use consent forms? How do you work with people in that kind of way, in that kind of very intimate way, and yet still preserve their ability to, I suppose, have a voice in terms of where the pictures get used and how they get used?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So let's say, for instance, for the camp, we got people to sign before the camp, luckily, because I'm not sure if they would have afterwards, but we made parents and the colonel sign consent forms. But let's start at the first part of the question. How do you win the trust? Because I think that's where, a consent form only comes after you get the trust first, right? So what I usually do when I think of a new group of young people, in this case, to follow, I try to explain to them what is this Born Free project about. So if it's through email or WhatsApp, I send them the mission statement. I explain to them it will be for international media, maybe for a website, maybe for a book. I don't know yet. Like throughout the years, I didn't know yet what it was going to be or what it was all going to be. So I stayed quite vague, but I did tell them it could be used anywhere, and I don't know yet. And I think to get these intimate moments, I really changed my approach in the past years. In the beginning, I would just linger around, stay. These guys would be watching television for 8 hours. I would be sitting there for 8 hours, kind of frantically waiting around for a picture. And I was waiting for the moment that I would become invisible. But I now finally, maybe I think it was in 2016, 2017, I finally found a way to kind of speed that process up. I would first sit with people, drink coffee, tell them my idea, and so on and so on. And then I would say, okay, guys, I'm here to take pictures. So please, if you could just ignore me for the rest of the time of me being here. I would still sometimes, I would ask them, please ignore me. Then they would start ignoring me. They would go on with their normal business. And I would be so happy and shooting. But I also sometimes feel a bit weird being in a room and being ignored and at the same time making them ignore me. And so sometimes I still chirp in with some small remarks or with a little joke. But in general, I would always go back to shooting quite quickly. So they get used to me within the first hours of meeting me, that I am there to shoot. Because what happened before is that I would be there and I would become a friend and like a new interesting person in the room, and we would be talking, and then at the end of the day I would leave and I would have 0 pictures. So now I go in there and I tell them, okay, I'm here to shoot, please ignore me, please try to ignore me. And it's really worked out, so I'm quite happy about my not new trick. I've used it for the last years and it's working. And for the consent forms, as I said, I try to explain to people that it's very important. I don't always use consent forms, but with subjects like that camp, I really felt I needed it. I made an hour-long documentary as well, and every Born Free that's in that hour-long documentary had a consent form as well. And I just explained to people, and usually they're very relaxed about it most of the time. So.
Thanks, Ilvy. So we still got quite a lot of questions coming, but I don't want to run on too long. So I think we'll take 2 or 3 more groups of questions, and then we'll try and finish in about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, if that's okay with everybody. There's a couple of questions here about how you kind of structured building this much bigger project out of all these smaller ones. And did you kind of plan each smaller photo essay in its own right and then do the next one, or were you working on them in sequence? And then when did you kind of know that you were done? When did you know that you had enough work to actually say, okay, this is the time to bring the whole project together into the final exhibition and publication?
Okay. Well, what I did, I had 2 different kind of, how would I say this? 2 different kinds of stories. I had the stories like the prom in that township, the one with the beautiful dress. I knew that those kind of stories would be possible to sell to publications. And I would make a story like that, round it up, put the edited images in a specific folder, and I knew that was a finished piece, and I would try to sell it to publication. But many of the other stories were maybe too boring on its own. So I would make it, I would shoot it, I would edit it, and I already knew, okay, I'm not going to be able to sell this to any publication. So I would also edit these pictures and also put them in a specific folder. And then in the end, I, of course, in 2018, 19, I was working towards the end of the project because I knew the 25th anniversary of the democracy of South Africa was coming up. And I was working towards that. So what I did then is looking through all my old files and folders. And of course, the stories that I still remembered were the ones that I remembered vividly were the ones that were published. And I also knew the edits that were made by the several publications. So that was quite easy. But there were also many stories that I hadn't looked at for 2, 3, 5, 6 years. And they were kind of, sometimes when I was looking through the images in 2019, going through all the folders, thousands of images, thousands, it would be a surprise, like, oh yeah, I remember this girl, or oh, I remember this guy. And sometimes I would reach out to them to see how they were doing. But most of the time, it was kind of a finished off story, and I would use the images in that folder. And to make, out of all these separate stories, to make one Born Free story, I just had to go back to that mission statement that changed throughout the years. But in 2018 and 2019, I really pinned it down, and I found a way in which it was really a guideline, just like the policy, the youth policy was a guideline. I knew which young people had to be in it. I knew I wanted to show rich and poor and all the different colors and rural and cities. And so the editing process was just going through those folders and killing some darlings as well, but also, picking the ones that I thought suited best, luckily with a lot of help from the people that I just mentioned, yeah. Does that kind of answer it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, great. Okay. A couple of questions were about the grant writing process and about also looking for funding outside of prizes and awards and I guess the kind of photographic ghetto. So, I mean, how much time do you actually spend on writing grants? Do you have any tips on that? Do you work with someone to help you write it and look at it afterwards? And how far did you cast your net, as it were, outside of the conventional, I suppose, photographic ghetto, if you like?
Unfortunately, I didn't as much as I should have. So the grants that I applied for were within the photographic world. And that's also because that's where my connections were. And I wish I would have joined 7 sooner. Of course, I wanted to, but because I know there is a lot of knowledge. And I think for grants, for projects like this, you definitely are better off, or maybe not better off, but it is definitely wise to look outside of the normal photographic grants. But it was a world that was kind of foreign to me, and I didn't know how to apply there. I'm now learning a lot more about it, and just by Googling, I find so much information. Sadly for me, it's all, of course, geared towards people still working on projects. And here I am. I just finished it. I put my whole savings account into it. Luckily enough, I have so many assignments always that I managed to do it this way, and the book has been super popular. So financially, it's really been good for me in the end. But there were years where it was a struggle. But I never believed that money should be, should stop a project like this. Looking back now, I would hire someone to do the grant proposals because it's not. I mean, I'm good at taking pictures, and I'm definitely not good at writing grant proposals. Otherwise, I would have probably gotten more grants in the past years. So when I venture out into a new big project, that's probably one of the first things I will do, to find someone who's job it is to look into grants. And I would advise that to anyone else as well. And if you don't have the money, maybe you can find a grant writer who would be willing to work on a grant proposal for a percentage of the final grant money. That's what I'm kind of hoping for, because I do know these people exist, and I think it would really come in handy.
Thanks, that's great. So I've got, I think, 3 more questions, and they're all quite different, so I'm going to separate them. But one was about self-publishing, and what kind of, let's say, maybe 3 things did you learn about self-publishing in terms of producing the Born Free book or poster exhibition, or whichever element you want to talk about?
Mm-hmm. So for the book, what I've learned, so I published a book before. I published it with a publisher, which was also, I mean, it's a different way of working. I'm glad that I self-published this book, because this book or this project is so close to my heart. I really felt the only way to publish it is to self-publish, I guess. I don't know. I felt like I wanted to have a full say of what I wanted and where it should go. And to be honest, I also wanted to know where the books end up and which price the book would be. So I think my advice would be, if you work with a publisher, work with someone you trust. If you self-publish like I do, get some information on do's and don'ts. I think the biggest thing that I would change next time, my book has 4 different covers, which was a great idea by Will Marie and myself, so by the graphic designer and myself, but it's really been difficult because, well, it's a disaster when you're shipping books in general. And when I give lectures, there's always 1 or 2 covers that everyone wants, and then the other one they don't want, and then you have the wrong ones with you, stuff like that. So I would really simplify by not ever making a book with several covers again. What I would do is do crowdfunding. I've done several crowdfundings in the past that were very successful. If you don't have the money to make a book up front and to pay for all of that, find people who are interested in the subject, and if they wanna buy the book in advance, that's what crowdfunding is, and it really worked for me a couple of times. And what I did now with my book is, it's sadly due to the coronavirus, now it's on a halt, but I organized a book tour, it's not a book tour, like a lecture tour around Europe, basically, and that's been really good for the book. Wherever I give a lecture, if there's 50 people in the room, 50 people get a book. And I think that's a nice way also to connect with the audience and to be close to them and to talk about the project. But it's also great that there's so much enthusiasm for a book like that. And when it comes to editing the book, if you're self-publishing, ask someone else to sit next to you and edit with you, and then show the design to several people. Ask them if it's smartly done, if it looks good, if they have any remarks. Yeah, ask a couple of people before you go and print the thing. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks. So we've got a question here, which I think is an interesting one, and it's the sort of around this classic question of what gives us the right to tell somebody else's story. So, in a sense, how did you feel that you had this, the subject like South Africa was something that you felt you had something to bring to? And then also the flip side of that, have you done similar projects in Europe or even in the Netherlands itself, looking at youth or other stories around your own space, in other words, telling the story of your own community? And how did you kind of balance, as it were, that tension between, what right do we have to tell other people's stories, I guess, effectively?
Yeah, good question. It's something, interestingly enough, that when I started the project, as I said, I started the Born Free project 1 year after I started photography. I started photography 13 years ago, and the Born Free was started 12 years ago. So back then, to be honest, I didn't think about this at all. Like, it didn't even cross my mind. Maybe it's weird, but I went to South Africa for the internship, and I never really thought, I just thought, I'm going to take pictures for the newspaper, and I'm also going to photograph young people. But then throughout the years, I started realizing how weird my position is, kind of, because the Dutch have such brutal history with South Africa. I mean, we're the colonizers of South Africa, so of course I got questions about that, not necessarily from the Born Frees. Not many of them asked about this, also because I found out that many of them don't know a whole lot about the history of their country. Many Born Frees that I followed never really questioned it, but I did get questions from, of course, South African photographers, and it made me really think, like, oh yeah, how do I think about this? And it was a bit confusing for me when these first questions started coming, maybe in 2015, 16. I think also in the photography world, this became a thing to think about. I personally believe that there's always an outsider voice to a story. Wherever photographers travel to, they will see a different thing than the local people. And I have done quite similar project where I focused on a specific group of people within the Netherlands, only within the Netherlands. It was actually a project about birthdays. If we would have more time, I wanted to show it, but we ran out of time. But I photographed 100 birthday celebrations, and not necessarily because I'm so interested in birthdays, but because it was a kind of a research into my own people, into the Dutch culture. What are we like? What do we do? How do we interact? What do our homes look like on the inside? It became a research quite similar in a way to Born Free. It took me 2 years to complete this project. And for me, it would be interesting to see a similar story being done by a foreign photographer. Actually, one of the students in a masterclass that I recently taught for 7, there was a Turkish photographer who actually came to my hometown, where I am now, Utrecht, in the Netherlands, and did a story here. And to see my hometown through his eyes was amazing. So I always think the outsider and the insider voice can be of importance, but you definitely have to try to be considerate about it. And that's why throughout the project I've always involved the Born Frees myself, and I asked them, what do you think about if I follow this group? What do you think about the way I portray this group? And I also asked many of my South African colleagues what they thought, because it's really a thin line, and I wanted to make sure that I was kind of on the right side of this line. But for some people you are, and for some people you aren't. And I guess throughout it all, I also learned a lot through this discussion. Yeah. I hope that kind of answers it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think it's very important to have all these different perspectives. So yeah, last question, I think, which is obviously very topical. We have a couple of people asking about what do you think the impact of the current crisis, the corona crisis, is going to have on photojournalism in general, but also, what are you currently doing in response to it? Do you feel like it's something that you're trying to respond to as a photographer, or are you just trying to survive in your own space? And what do you think the future is going to bring? And obviously that's a huge crystal ball and we have no idea.
Yeah.
But do you think it's going to change? I mean, to me, one of the interesting things about this is, in a sense, a reflection on the question you just asked, is this is something that's now affecting everybody. There's almost nobody on the planet that isn't going to be in some way affected by this negatively. So it's suddenly something that's been brought right into literally into everybody's own space. And I think that's a really interesting and problematic thing to be thinking through. So just wonder what your response has been to COVID-19 and what are you planning to do, if anything?
Yeah, well, I must say when the Netherlands is not on a full lockdown, so we can actually go outside. So I have been shooting, been very careful as well while shooting and keeping my distance, because, I mean, it's weird. I mean, with a virus, you can't see it, but it's there, and everyone is talking about it. So it's in a way, I fear it, but I'm also still shooting. And what I think will change in general is, I think we're going in the upcoming maybe year or years. I don't know. I mean, that's really crystal ball, but I think we're going to be traveling a lot less, which kind of connects through the previous question. Maybe there will be a lot more storytelling within our own communities, which for me would actually be a big change in my life because I have been on the road for the last 12 years, almost constantly traveling. But it's interesting to me also to show your own community and to show the stories in your own place. And that might be one of the things that changes. I think another thing that will change is, well, the upcoming months I had many exhibitions planned, a lot of lectures and workshops which have all been cancelled, and they're all now moving online like we are doing now. And today I got an email from an organization that would be exhibiting a big outdoor exhibition somewhere, and they reached out today asking they reached out to all the different photographers, and they asked, have you heard or seen any amazing ways of organizing exhibitions in a new way? I mean, there's definitely going to be a new way, which made me think, okay, when are we all going to be able again to go to an exhibition and stand next to each other? It might not happen, and the new way, whatever it may be, I mean, I can't even imagine going and looking at at photographers' work, for instance, where you would usually go to Perpignan or to Arles, that you would now be watching that online. But I definitely think there will be a new way, and we will have to adapt to it. And in the meantime, I've also, for the first time, turned my camera on my own life. I've never shot anything that has to do about me. It's because I don't think I'm that interesting, but this situation kind of forced me to show life from the inside of my home, because I've been inside a lot more. So I've taken out a old Polaroid camera, and I'm making a diary. And all the other 7 photographers and mentees are also working on a diary showing the daily life, what it is like during lockdown. And that's what I also just mentioned, when you are working or you want to start a long-term project and you feel you're stuck in your home and you can't shoot anything. Actually, you can. You could turn, I mean, you've seen it, these projects being done. Turn the camera towards your own life. What is it like to be inside? This time that we are in now is going to be photographically, historically, so interesting. It needs to be documented. So, yeah. So that's what I do, and I hope that you guys also do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ilvy. Got some fantastic feedback from the audience. We had over 150 people at one point following it on Facebook Live, as well as 100 in the room. So amazing. Wonderful presentation and full of really amazing insights. And thank you so much. This is the first of what's going to be a regular series of presentations by 7 photographers. So please do join us again. We have another one coming up next Thursday at the same time, with Chris Morritt talking about political photography, and hopefully we're going to post a link into that in here now. But do keep your eye on the 7 Facebook page. We'll be sending regular updates out, and we're really, 7 as an agency and the foundation, the academy, has really tried to respond as quickly and as positively as we can to this extraordinary situation that we're in, both in terms of our photographers trying to document it, as Ilvy said, this incredible moment in time, but also in trying to, get ourselves out there, providing resources, getting this lecture program up and running, the 7 book club that we have as well. Some of you may have attended on last Monday. So we really are trying to get this communication, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity to reach out and to get feedback and to get interacting and to engage with our audiences in a very direct way. And obviously these kind of events are a very powerful way for us to do that and to see through the noise. So thank you all so much for your attention. Thank you all so much for staying with us. And thank you, Ilvy. Big round. I'll give you the round of applause because
thanks everyone for being here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely wonderful. And thank you all for being in the audience, and those of you following on Facebook Live, thank you as well. And the recording will be available shortly too. Thank you very much, Ilvy. That was amazing.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.